as a resolution approving a waiver of the sidewalk requirement installation covenant for New Heights Church at 309 East Hillcrest Avenue. J is receive and file fiscal year 21 community development work program. K is resolution setting a public hearing on consideration of ordinance amending chapter 100 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Indianola, Iowa, by eliminating interest charges associated with connection fees in certain connection fee districts. L is resolution setting a public hearing on consideration, of ordinance amending subsection 3 of section 100.12 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Indianola, Iowa, by eliminating interest charges associated with connection fees in in the Highway 92 West Sewer Benefit District. Item M is a resolution authorizing a replacement of manhole E302. Item N is resolution approving an amendment to the employee handbook regarding the clothing reimbursement policy. Item O is a resolution approving liability, auto, property, workers' compensation, and machinery and equipment replacement insurance for fiscal year 21. Items P and Q have been pulled. Item R is a resolution authorizing the temporary suspension of various administrative and penalty charges for an additional 30 days for city provided utilities. Item S is resolution increasing ambulance rates and adopting the fee schedule in whole effective July 1st, 2020. Item T is approval of pay application number 3 for Vanderpool Construction for the Quail Meadows 3 lift station and sewer improvements project in the amount of $155,531.62.
Motion to approve. Second.
First and second, any discussion on those items? If not, Jackie, please roll call.
Councilmember Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Aye.
Kling.
Aye.
Schroeder.
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant.
Aye.
Thank you, council. We'll take these in alphabetical order and ladies first, of course. Gwen, item H, which is second consideration of ordinance approving a proposed development plan and rezoning from R3 mixed residential zoning district to the R5 planned residential or planned residence district. Go ahead, Gwen.
I don't really have anything to add other than that I was opposed to it last meeting. I want to make sure I'm consistent in my vote. So just wanted to vote separately on that one.
Yeah, we'll probably go ahead and just do that, Gwen, if that's your druthers. Very good.
Second.
Any comments on that?
Greta did make the motion and Bob did did second it quietly. Well, that's an FYI.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any discussion? Jackie, roll call on item H, please.
Councilmember Marchant.
Aye.
Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Aye.
Kling.
Aye.
Schroeder.
Nay.
Southall.
Aye.
Thank you, council. Item P is resolution setting salaries for fiscal year 21. Mr. Kling.
Yes, for both of those, my son is on the fire department and his salary's in there, so I will abstain.
Fair enough, thank you.
Can we take those both at the same time?
Yes.
Okay. I move to approve resolution setting salaries for fiscal year 21 and the resolution approving salaries.
Second.
Got that, Jackie?
I did.
Very good. Discussion? Roll call, please, Jackie. Thank you.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant.
Aye.
Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Aye.
Abstain.
And finally, Councilman Parker has asked for item U to be pulled. John, this is claims on computer printout for June 15, 2020.
I have a claim for Parker signs in there, so I will be abstaining. So.
All right, thanks, sir.
Claims.
Second.
Discussion? Jackie, go ahead, please.
Councilmember Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Abstain.
Kling.
Aye.
Schroeder.
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 6 is the city treasurer's report. Doug Shull.
Mayor, Doug isn't here today, so I'm going to be presenting for Doug.
All right, Andy, thank you.
I just have a few things to say about the treasurer's report. As noted on the cover sheet, does not include elation information. We did not receive that from IMU for this to get on the council agenda. So we'll present that later once we get that information. April is one of the 2 months in the year when we get the majority of property tax revenue. So you'll see that there's the larger than average increase in revenues for the general fund departments. Fund 321, we saw a negative balance there, but that's due because we haven't done the transfer of funds from the road use tax fund into the street projects fund yet. And Fund 781, which is the water resource recovery fund, is likely to continue to be negative throughout the construction of the facility, since we do a reimbursement. We make payments and then we get the reimbursement from the SRF. But we did just get a large $570,000 reimbursement from the SRF loan for some legal costs and also for initial construction costs. Any questions on the report? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to accept the treasurer's report.
Second.
Discussion? Jackie?
Councilmember Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Aye.
Kling.
Aye.
Schroeder.
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant.
Aye.
Very good. Moving on to item A under issue 6 is receive and file the April 2020 EMS billing activity report.
Move to receive and file the April 2020 EMS billing activity report.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Jackie?
Councilmember Kling.
Aye.
Schroeder.
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant.
Aye.
Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Excuse me just a second as I switch between two computers. Sorry. Very good. Thank you for your patience. As you know, we've been in a little bit of concern, certainly, in terms of racial concerns here in the community and also statewide and, of course, countrywide as well. I think it's an appropriate time for us to have this resolution condemning racism and other hateful acts and reaffirming our commitment as city and also as a city employment to fighting, city employees, I'm sorry, to fighting for justice and human and civil rights for all. This is on page 219 and 220 of your packet. And I'll just read it quickly, excuse me, as I turn away for just a moment. But as mentioned, this is a resolution condemning racism and other hateful acts and reaffirming the city of Indianola's commitment to fighting for justice and human and civil rights. So whereas the city of Indianola, its governing body, departments, and employees citywide are deeply saddened by the tragic events that have recently occurred across the country. And whereas racism, hate, and bigotry have no place in our city, and we are committed to working actively against all forms of racism. We are committed to safeguarding our community against the damages that racism and bigotry cause, and to ensuring the constitutional rights of every person who lives, works, and visits our great city are protected. And whereas the Indianola Police Department has had longstanding policies of honesty, openness, and transparency, and it's committed to continuing these policies with internal and external stakeholders in a continuing effort to build on the culture and trust with whom they serve. And whereas the city of Indianola truly appreciates the overwhelming support of our departments, like the police department that we received from this great community, and it is our promise to each and every one of you that we will continue to work diligently every day to exceed your expectations in all aspects of citywide operations. Therefore, let it be resolved that the mayor and the city council of the city of Indianola hereby strongly condemn racism and other hateful acts and reaffirm our commitment to fighting for justice and human and civil rights for all. Passed and approved this 15th day of June, 2020. I'll be more than happy to sign that tomorrow when it comes across my desk.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Jackie, please.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant.
Aye.
Hewlin. Aye. Parker.
Aye.
Kling.
Aye.
Thank you, council. Item B is a resolution adopting city council rules of procedure.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Jackie?
Councilmember Marchant.
Aye.
Hewlin. Aye. Parker,
Aye.
Kling,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall. Aye.
Item C is consideration, I think it should be considering, consideration of the renomination of Aaron Freeberg to the Planning and Zoning Commission from July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2025.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Jackie?
Councilmember Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall. Aye. Marchant,
Aye.
Hewlin.
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Kling.
Aye.
Thank you. D, under council reports, is consideration of the nomination of Heidi Levine to the Hometown Pride Committee from July 1, 2020 until June 30th, 2022.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Jackie?
Councilmember Marchant,
Aye.
Hewlin. Aye. Parker,
Aye.
Kling,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall. Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to item E, Councilman Parker has an update from Greater Des Moines Convention report. Thanks, John.
Mayor, before we do that, could I ask you a question about the other nomination that hasn't been brought forward yet
Sure.
for IMU? Have you had a chance to speak with Lori?
I have not yet, Gwen.
Can you maybe FaceTime or phone call? Or I had a call from Mike Rosga expressing concern because, you know, there'll be another opening in July and then we'll have two new people, you know, very inexperienced. So I just wondered if there was another way to handle that rather than face-to-face.
You know, I had the same conversation. Thanks for bringing it up, Gwen. I had the same conversation with Mr. Rosga a week or so ago. Yeah, I can certainly call her up. I would prefer to have face-to-face, as I've said, for the last few months, but I can call her up.
I understand that face-to-face is always better, but do you know her at all? Have you had any?
I know if it's always been my policy, Gwen, that if I knew a person, either through my mayor position or through another position in the community, that I didn't insist on meeting with them face to face. I guess maybe it's just the personality in me, or maybe the professor in me that prefers to meet people face to face the first time. I know that Mr. Rosga had that conversation with her back in January, but I've not had an opportunity to do that.
And I agree with you. I just think times have changed. So I appreciate that you're going to call or FaceTime. Thank you.
Yep.
Good?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep,
Okay.
I'm good.
Greater Des Moines Convention report. We actually have our quarterly meeting on Wednesday via Zoom. So I don't have any updates other than we did get email and an updated budget from Greg from the staff at CVB, and you know, they get their money for the most part from their 2080 partnerships with communities. So and that's based on Hotel-Motel Tax. So we're struggling a little bit, but they do notice an uptick from their conversations with hotels in the area and stuff, that it's starting to come back around. I'm, you know, it's on a personal anecdotal. I always look when I'm coming home. I look off to see how hotels are doing in our town, and I'm starting to see a lot more cars. So hopefully that means that we'll start to see those things kind of balance back out. But we've already, I know the budget committee has already revised this next year's budget, which we'll be approving Wednesday night twice. So people are scrambling to try to make sure everything's moving forward for next year, and being as conservative as you can, you know, not knowing exactly the full extent of the revenue loss, but they are being proactive. And as soon as at the next meeting, I'll have more of an update on how everything ends up. So.
Good, John, thank you. Moving on to Metro Advisory, Mr. Kling.
Yes, Metro Advisory, City of Des Moines also passed a racial profiling ordinance. At their meeting, they had all sorts of problems. They had over 1,000 people join the city council meeting through Zoom, and then they've been targeted for racial slurs and everything else for call-ins. So they've had a lot of problems trying to do that, but it has passed. There are a couple things that came up at at the Metro concerning some legislative update, and I'll just pick a couple of them that I think are very important. One was gun legislation. This bill would make it more challenging for local governments to regulate possessions of firearms on city properties. Two changes the bill would make include the following. It would allow a person who successfully challenged it in a court, a city's regulation of possession of a firearm, to be able to recover attorney's fees and court costs from the city, and would prohibit political subdivision from prohibiting possession of a firearm in a city building unless the political subdivision has installed metal detectors in the building and also provides armed security. The Senate approved the bill on the floor last week, sending it to the governor for her consideration. And John Edwards asked if this prevents cities from doing anything in public buildings regarding gun restrictions. Tom Copes from Johnson said the restrictions can still be put in place, but cities would need to put in certain measurements in place, such as officer metal detectors, and it's expected the governor would sign the bill. Another one is a bill to prohibit local governments from adopting any type of local regulation that would prohibit a landlord from refusing to rent a person based on that person holding a Section 8 voucher. This latest bill was approved by the House, and the next step, it'll be considered at the floor. And let's see, the next one was, it was important to bill that would require all government entities to sell property to the highest bidder, unless the governing body, city council, etc., found there was good cause to accept the lower bid. Bill still needs to be approved by the full Senate, and then will be considered from the House. That's it for, that's the highlights really for the Metro Advisory.
Go on to Bravo, please, Bob.
Bravo. As you're all aware, Bravo has been significantly impacted during this pandemic. Bravo gets its funding from the Hotel-Motel Tax. Bravo and its funding mechanism and granting process has been a model for other cities across the United States. But to give you an idea on funding, Bravo's actual revenue for March of 2019 was $4,763,000. Revenue estimated for June are at $3,285,000. For June of 2021, we're projecting a revenue of only $2,497,000. In other words, we're going to be going from 4.75 million to 2.5 million, a drastic change. The pandemic effects will appear in the third quarter revenue receipts, which is we'll receive in June, which will be January, February, March, and we'll in the fourth quarter we anticipate zero revenue for the fourth quarter.
Whoa.
How long that goes, you know, we'll wait to be seen. Here's what Bravo is changing. I mean, we're doing major changes now to cope with this. First of all, we're honoring all existing grants and community impact commitments. We're going to protect funding from 28E partners to try and demonstrate the value and relevance. Maximize operational expenses, maximize public funds being invested. We're going to serve core Bravo functions in a way that sustainability, maintain Bravo stability. We're going to shift to a cash-based modeling, and they're going to totally redo how the gala works. And let me explain this. The gala is extremely expensive, even though it makes about $125,000 from the event, which goes directly to Bravo. Bravo puts it on. It costs about $394,000 to do this. So it's a major deal. We get that much back, so we've got to figure out how that's going to change. Now, Bravo has always provided its grants upon the revenue projections for the last number of years. In fact, I know at least for the last 9, I can't think how far back, but every year since then, our revenue has increased because of the Hotel-Motel Tax, and we're able to make accurate projections. So now it's going to be on a cash basis. What we have on hand at the time is what we're going to be able to allocate to the grants instead of planning down the road what we may, because the money comes in quarters. So that makes it tough. Prior to COVID-19, Bravo was looking to hire one more full-time employee. Now that has been nixed, and unfortunately, we will be eliminating one of the 3 existing full-time positions. Now, good news, Bravo has 3 cultural representatives. And for the last 2 years, my friend, director Des Moines Arts Center. Jeff Fleming has served as one of those reps. He's going off the board, and in this place will be Michael Eagle for the Des Moines Metro office. So we're excited to have Michael on board in this position. Okay. That's it.
Thank you, Bob. Any questions for Bob or Mr. Parker, either one? Thanks, guys. Moving on to item 8, A is the community update. Want to give a applause to the Mayor's Youth Council, Indianola Police Department, as well as Parks and Recreation. They handed out just nearly 100 bicycle helmets for Bike Fest a couple weekends ago. Took a little bit of different form than we've had in the past, but wanted to thank those 3 parts of the city of Indianola, and certainly Becky, who helps coordinate that quite heavily. See a lot out there in terms of relaxation of COVID-19. Be aware, of course, that COVID-19 cases are still growing here in Indianola. A lot of different arguments for wearing masks or not wearing masks. I always try to wear a mask when I go out to public, and would encourage those of you to do so as well, not only to protect yourselves, but of course, those persons that you might run into. And so thanks for wearing a mask. As of this afternoon, 197 reported cases here, and talking to Chief Chia late last week, again, a number of more cases here in Indianola than we are probably comfortable with. And so just be aware that while the state does continue to relax some of those restrictions as it relates to COVID-19 and the pandemic, we still are certainly in the thick of it at this time. Speaking of in the thick of it, the census is going on. We do have very high numbers, very high report rates here in the city. And of course, in Iowa, I believe last time I checked, Iowa was 3rd in the country, being beaten by the Gophers north of us and the Badgers to the north and east of us. Wisconsin and Minnesota were ahead of us. In the coming days, I will be mobilizing the Complete Count Committee, and will encourage them to reach out. That is a committee that I put together. We have not done much because of COVID-19, but we'll be doing that primarily through social media and through reaching out. So hopefully we'll continue to see those numbers edge up. But again, hats off to community development, and particularly Charlie, who's taken the reins on this. And I know Ryan has done quite a little bit as well. So thank you, gentlemen, on that. A week ago today, Council member Southall and I had a very interesting first initial conversation, I believe, probably in terms of establishing the Human Rights Commission. Greta showed interest immediately during the meeting, in fact. So she was texting during the meetings, Councilwoman. And so I was pleased to see, guilty as charged, right? I was pleased to see that. And we had a great conversation initially with an individual who does a lot of work with the Ames Police Department, and had a very good conversation, and some issues that we'll continue to address as we begin to move forward on that idea of reestablishing that Human Rights Commission. I think the big takeaway, and I'll let Greta talk a little bit about this if she would like, but one of the big takeaways is that we certainly want this commission to have something to do, and we need to have it kind of data-driven as well. Greta, anything to add to that?
No, I'll just add that, yes, that was my takeaway as well, that it was not about reestablishing the commission, but rather setting up a bunch of listening sessions so that we could gauge from our community what in fact we need and look at any data that exists before moving forward. So that was the big thing. And Mayor Shaw and I talked about how we might go about setting up these listening sessions. So that's probably where we're going next. It was a very productive meeting. Nice.
Very good. Thanks, Greta. And thanks again for your continued interest. So we will continue. If anybody else on council is interested in that, please let either Greta or myself know. We can continue to move forward with that and with those discussions and the data collection in that regard. I've never done this before in 6.5 years of being mayor. So I did throw together a PowerPoint as we move on into the entrepreneurial and Launchpad 65 proposal. That PowerPoint was put together late this afternoon, and I think Alex does have it available on the computer there. For the benefit of those of you who are not on council, when we went through the budget process last time, the council in the fiscal year budget for 2020, the year we are currently in, gave the mayor $3,500 for a roundtable that was to address different entrepreneurial ecosystems and efforts here as it relates to economic development here in the city of Indianola. In that proposal, I asked for two different things, and the PowerPoint talks about those different things, but it was really a little bit of a background here in terms of the 2020 budget, and then also the two steps that were to take place. And so the first step really was to meet with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial facilitators in the community to recognize various roadblocks that exist in the city of Indianola for entrepreneurialism. A number of you know, but some of you who were not on council previously may not know that the last couple of years, including this year as well, I've gone down to the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City and I've attended a mayor's entrepreneurial conference there. The primary focus is to get entrepreneurial efforts underway, develop what is oftentimes referred to as entrepreneurial infrastructure or a culture that allows for entrepreneurs to use communities such as Indianola as a gathering place to bounce ideas off of one another. And so early on, what I proposed in my budget justification for fiscal year 2020 early on was a two-step process. The first step was, and we'll talk about this, the first step was to really examine kind of the entrepreneurial environment here in Indianola and to recognize the different roadblocks that exist in the city. And then the second step, which the $3,500, thank you, Ryan. The second step, which the $3,500 was really allocated toward, was a roundtable addressing ways to overcome these different roadblocks. And so very early on, to hit that first agenda item or first budgetary item, I met with a number of persons, a number of stakeholders, not only in Warren County, but also in the region who work on entrepreneurial issues. And you can see Stacy, Lovan, and Rachel, and Amy and Terry listed there on that second slide with the background. And then developed more into addressing a roundtable that is to address the different concerns of entrepreneurs. So on step one, you see the results from the meetings with entrepreneurs. As I began to peel back the layers of this onion, as oftentimes happens in the community, I found that there was a bit of a critical mass developing in terms of entrepreneurialism. And so I just call this step one, kind of the results from meeting with different entrepreneurs. And again, some of those different individuals, say from the DeWine Partnership, in terms of Stacy and others, to address what is it in Indianola that will allow us to develop kind of this entrepreneurial infrastructure and spirit. And what I found, and if you guys are not familiar with it, I'd encourage you to go to launchpad65.org, and found that there exists in Indianola a organization which promotes entrepreneurialism. You can see the board members listed there. The chairman is Zach Fesser, who I've gotten to meet. He works at IMC Insurance, but is actually a Simpson College graduate and is one of those students who grew up kind of learning about entrepreneurialism through the Emerge Center at Simpson College. You can see the other board members listed there as well. And so as I started to look at step one here in terms of meeting with entrepreneurs and seeing what the different roadblocks were for them, naturally anybody without meeting with anyone would recognize that capital, money is one of the main drivers, of course, in this regard. But moving beyond money and moving beyond capital, a few themes developed in terms of what was missing in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit, or at least the entrepreneurial infrastructure that would allow entrepreneurs to take place. And you can see those listed here on this third slide in terms of beyond just capital, also missing is knowledge among entrepreneurs regarding those things that it takes to operate a business. And I know John runs a business and Gwen runs a business, and a number of you have probably been involved in small business as well. But certainly just how to set up a corporation, marketing, record keeping, access to meeting space was another problem that we heard. And so a number of these different concerns can be addressed immediately by Launchpad 65, but a few cannot. And so that is where we get into this step 2 and that conversation or brief conversation I want to have with you tonight. And so that step 2 really is the nuts and bolts of my proposal in terms of the $3,500. And in terms of seeing how we can develop a approach to help entrepreneurs here. And so a few weeks ago, well, a couple months ago actually, began talking to Amy Duncan, who's been heavily engaged in the board and an entrepreneur herself, and a member of the board as well, and began to learn more about the different facilities in the community. One was Launchpad 65, which you see listed here on this 4th slide, which provides Indianola entrepreneurs with free basic professional business services. Board members facilitate meetings between entrepreneurs and local service providers, and those service providers would provide these different elements which you see listed here. So the business attorneys, market research professionals, certified public accountants, and marketing professionals. Now, if you recall from the previous slide, these are a number of roadblocks that entrepreneurs face. And so Launchpad 65, instead of having the forum, the roundtable, which I was going to propose and which was approved already by council in terms of $3,500, what we did was put our heads together and talk about how could Launchpad 65, without having to reinvent the wheel, although maybe from an entrepreneurial perspective, that would be a good thing. But how can Launchpad 65 and the city work together to help entrepreneurs address some of these different concerns here? So Launchpad 65 developed an agreement, and we'll talk about kind of the outskirts of those agreements or the sketches of those agreements, then I'll answer any questions that you might have. And so really in a nutshell, you guys, what this proposal is asking you, basically for me to shift having this roundtable and shift this into actually having that $3,500 go out into the community and help entrepreneurs and also help the various service providers, such as attorneys, market research companies, marketing professionals, and whatnot. And so on slide 5, we do see a lot of value added to this proposal. One thing that would happen would be that Launchpad 65 would help coordinate relationships between entrepreneurs and those various service providers, those attorneys, those marketers, those market analysts here in the community that could help our entrepreneurs here decide if, you know, their idea actually has legs in that regard. And how do you then set up your corporation in that regard? The relationships would move forward the idea of building, if you will, this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And some of the value added components of it would be that entrepreneurs and service providers are given access to Launchpad 65. Launchpad 65 is headquartered in the Salem connection. You probably know where Terry's real estate office is. He has set back in there meeting rooms, meeting tables. And certainly one of the things that we find in terms of entrepreneurialism is that they oftentimes don't need a physical space. They live in a virtual world, but sometimes from time to time, they need to have a place to meet with clients or need to have a place to meet, say, with financiers and bankers and what have you. And so Launchpad 65 and Salem Connection allows for them to use this space free of charge. We would also then have entrepreneurs and service providers given access to Launchpad 65 membership and benefits. And these benefits are tied into the metro area in terms of million cups of coffees, certainly emerge a number of these different entrepreneurial groups as well. And so here's the logistics. And again, I want to run this by council in this regard. I do have a plan B, but hope it doesn't get to that. The logistics of such would be that Launchpad 65 would invoice the city for that budgeted $3,500. $3,500, which again has already been approved. But instead of going to another roundtable to see how do we overcome these barriers, we would actually use that $3,500 to try to overcome these barriers that have been identified by people working in the community much longer than me. in terms of this. Launchpad 65 will track expenses and, importantly, the various successes that come out of this $3,500. And again, the emphasis will be on this $3,500 being spent here in Indianola, not only exclusively on entrepreneurs, but also to those service providers, the attorneys, the marketers, whatnot here in the community, so that there would be extra value added, not only an economic development element, but also value added to the service providers here in the city. And then finally, any unspent funds as of June 1st, 2021 will be returned to the city of Indianola. So those monies would come back. Again, $3,500, not a huge splash, but again, want to be transparent. We want to be responsible with those monies. And so that's how that would happen if there was any money left. So just a few questions, a few outcomes here. You can read those on this last slide as well as I can. So as a lecturer, professor, I won't go back over those. But I think this is a fairly good use, not a fairly good use, a very good use of monies. It immediately helps entrepreneurs. It builds that entrepreneurial infrastructure. And it also, really importantly, creates connections between entrepreneurs and some of those service providers in that regard. So as you know, council, we have a meeting coming up next Tuesday in terms of a year-end financial meeting. And so just wanted to run this by you. And if you had any questions, I would be more than happy to answer those questions. But this is kind of how this has morphed. And when I put this proposal together and council was kind enough to allocate $3,500 once upon a time, didn't really know where I was going, but I don't have much entrepreneurialism in me. But I did want to, as this opportunity kind of migrated, I did want to take advantage of some of the competencies that were already there. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you folks might have.
Bob Kling, are there any other like board members or community leaders or companies or anybody else that's putting money into this?
There is not, Bob. You do see the board members listed there, of course, but no, there are no others there. One of the persons that we worked with, and I didn't call her name, Kelly Webster, she has worked closely with Brenda Easter in the chamber as they developed their kind of her work model, if you will, and has also worked with WCEDC in that regard too. But to answer your question, no, there's nobody else chomping at the bit right now to help entrepreneurs financially.
Okay, my concern was, well, first of all, entrepreneurs, these entrepreneurs, what their job basically is going to be is to help other people figure out how to make money. And if you're an entrepreneurial expert, you should be able to figure out how to make money to have something like this. I thought it was going to be the round table where we brought in experts, and that's I realized it's changed. I guess I'd like to have seen this a little ahead of time to look at a little more. Mm-hmm. It's just totally different than what we had originally agreed on.
That's the one thing I have. I am familiar with Zach Fazer. I'm very impressed with him. I worked with him when I was at Simpson. He's a great young man. One of, I would guess, few Simpson students who decided to stay and live in Indianola while still working in Des Moines. Great kid. But I don't understand the difference between what the chamber does and Warren County Economic Development and this. So, I mean, I don't know if I need more information. If you have anything else you can provide, or because I'd like to get behind it, but I do feel like I need to know a little bit more.
Right. Well, primarily Warren County Economic Development is, and Ryan can speak to this, and Mr. Marshall can as well, Gwen. Typically, they respond to inquiries of companies that want to come into Warren County or somewhere in central Iowa. That's my understanding. There have been some efforts by the chamber in terms of entrepreneurialism, but again, with Brenda and her small staff, Barb and whatnot, they primarily address those concerns and provide the member benefits to the members in that regard. And so there's not much in terms of establishing an entrepreneurial environment that is currently being met by any of those different organizations. And I think being WCEDC and also the chamber. So I think that's why we began to see Emerge come about. And as you mentioned, that was, I think you were probably at Simpson at the time, when Emerge first came about in terms of entrepreneurialism and building that infrastructure. But there really isn't any formal organization, and certainly none that has a lot of funding. And again, not that $3,500 is a lot of funding, but there is no Indianola organization currently that focuses primarily, Gwen, on entrepreneurialism. So that's my understanding, having talked to folks at the chamber, having talked to folks at WCDC, and then of course Launchpad 65 as well. This proposal would put a little more energy directly behind creating this entrepreneurial environment.
And is Emerge pretty active? It was not active when I left, but I realize I've been gone quite a while now, and it's a different director. So is it pretty active now again?
It is active. Yeah, it continues to be active. Todd Kilcoff, who is an ex officio member, he's not a formal member of the board, but ex officio, given his ties to Emerge, and he still runs the Emerge Center at Simpson, still employed by Simpson in that capacity. And so he has been an important driver at Simpson in terms of entrepreneurialism. Some of you who may not know about Emerge, and again, Zach who is the chairman of this board for Launchpad 65, is a Simpson alum. He's gone through the leadership programs and whatnot at Simpson, and of course in Central Iowa as well. And he also has benefited from some of the entrepreneurial elements there. I should also add that given that I am employed at Regent universities here in the state of Iowa, each one of the universities has entrepreneurial center, which I intend to bring into the fold. And in fact, I talked to them during this first step as well during this process. And so would continue to build on this seed opportunity and continue to build on this after the fiscal year, the beginning of the fiscal year in that regard.
So I have one more question.
Sure.
The money then would be paid to the people who would consult as marketing experts and statisticians and that kind of person, or that's what the money would be spent on, or
yes.
Are you taking volunteers for those? Because I know there are attorneys who do volunteer work for certain things, and I don't know if marketing research people do, but I didn't know if you maybe have a volunteer committee as well, and some you pay, or how you do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be great if people would volunteer, right? But in reality, that's not the case all the time. And so I'm sure there would be some added benefit to the realization that Launchpad 65 is now reaching out to these different service providers for entrepreneurs there. But the answer to your question, Gwen, is that yes, that $3,500 would go to service providers here in the city of Indianola. And again, so that the money would have a double effect, which again, as I like to talk about, would have that compounding effect or that value added effect. And that not only could it be used as an instrument in our toolbox for economic development, but it would also then benefit the small businesses that already exist here in the city.
Mayor, I have some questions / concerns.
Sure.
One is the $3,500 was a budgeted item, but it's not an approved expense. So I want to make sure everybody understands we haven't approved the expenditure of the money. Secondly, when you first brought this forward, I think in February of 2019, to have a roundtable in August of 2019, we mentioned other organizations like Emerge and Launchpad 65 at that time. And I recall you telling us your proposal was different because of the roundtable aspect and the fact you were going to bring in all these experts. And what I see happening here by this request is Launchpad 65 has been trying to sell memberships and things to get people on board to help them do something significant. I haven't seen that happen
Mhm.
in the time that I've been in the community. And I just don't see that us authorizing payment of money to Launchpad 65, when you originally mentioned there was 5 organizations involved, the Chamber, WCEDC, Greater Des Moines Partnership, Launchpad 65, and Emerge.
Right.
And it looks like it's narrowed down now to Launchpad 65. How participatory have the other stakeholders been in the roundtable you said was going to maybe take place on June 25th or 26th? And the fact now that I don't see any dollars going into this from any of the other organizations. So I'm a little confused by the request and don't think we are quite following what your requested budget item was.
Well, I've talked in that initial round, Greg, and as I mentioned, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and using resources that we already knew the answers to, as I got more into understanding the different players that are driving entrepreneurialism here, those were the key stakeholders that I talked to. So as I mentioned, I did talk to Stacy Levan, have talked to WCDC, primarily Rachel there, have talked to the Chamber, and have talked to Launchpad 65. So I've talked to all the different stakeholders that I said I would go out and talk to. You're correct in terms of the timeline is a little pushed back because of the fact that I wanted to make sure that we got the best value added out of this. You know, I used to in another life do conferences, and $3,500 certainly will and remains the plan B should a council decide this is not a good use of spending, because I am aware of the fact that while you approve the budget, you haven't approved this expenditure at this point in time. So I do have a plan B, which is more in line with the traditional roundtable, which I mentioned, Greg. However, I do also want to make sure that the monies are spent as well as possible. And as I started to better understand the roadblocks, which is part 2 of my proposal to council for the budget, as I started to better understand the roadblocks, I better understood the necessities and the needs here in the community. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of morphed into that proposal. Certainly something that is missing is the sustainability element too, which was part of that proposal. The Sustainability Committee has gone off in a different direction, but still nonetheless are making important contributions to the community. And I've been engaged in that committee as well, kind of bringing that about. As you know, we have some of the nuclear, no, wouldn't that be cool? Some of the solar initiatives picking up here this summer in the county. And so sustainability is kind of headed off in another direction. I still think, not that I'm a huge supporter of this, but I still think there are some green jobs that can be created in Indianola through entrepreneurialism that addresses sustainability in that regard. So that's frankly, Greg, why I wanted to come to council and say, you know, this is kind of the new direction that I'm seeing. There will be absolute transparency between that and the value added that brings. But I'm hearing from council perhaps that you're not sold on that idea. And so we can certainly go in the same direction. I just wanted to run this by council at this time to see if there's any appetite for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is I wouldn't support this. And if you can't have a roundtable before the end of June, you're trying to carry an expenditure over into the next year's budget, which we haven't budgeted for, which I wouldn't support that either. So I don't know what your plan B is, but I mean, I think the process that you laid out and tried to lay out in, I believe it was February of 2019. Mm-hmm. We're not there, we're not close. And I don't believe that we should put city dollars into Launchpad 65. I do believe that if people wanted talk to an attorney or a CPA, that Greater Des Moines Partnership, Chamber, and/or Warren County Economic Development would probably be happy to chip in the dollars to pay for that. So if the group is truly going to get together and work together, I think that's where the dollar should come from. And I know Launchpad 65 has been trying to raise money. I don't think it's up to the city to try to make them more successful. So that's where I personally stand on this issue.
Okay, thank you.
I guess Mayor John Parker, how many individuals are working through Launchpad 65 right now? I mean, how many people, clients, I guess you'd call them, do they have?
That's a good question, John. They have, I mean, it ebbs and flows, as you know, as a business person, it ebbs and flows in terms of the client. You know, one of the big benefits of this is putting, and again, you're an entrepreneur, I guess you inherited a business, but still you have to be on cutting edge in that regard.
Well, I didn't inherit anything.
Well, you're paying for it. Apologies, you understand what I mean.
Right.
You run a small business.
Got it. Okay. And then I guess my other thing is, 3,500 is when you start talking about these types of things is not much. And so my concern is what other, to sustain whatever momentum was started with 3,500, what else is out there to sustain that, to be able to keep going? Because, I know in the past here, anytime we've worked in projects or whatever, the city's money, you always were trying to get that to be the last one in, and here it seems like we're on the front end of it, and I guess my concern is there's not a lot of track record of success here. I don't, like I said, if we're the first money in, where's everything else coming, and what's the plans for that to be able to sustain whatever momentum is brought forward?
Right. No, that's a great question. And I think that this will lay the groundwork and will certainly be one of the, I guess, a linchpin in terms of getting momentum growing. I've thought about going out and asking different businesses to engage and participate in this. And I've had that conversation with a couple businesses. To be honest, again, a lot of businesses, as you know, like to see a little, what's the name? Well, I'm looking for, the metaphor I'm looking for. A little flesh in the game, I guess, in terms of making a contribution to that. But I think this would be a good linchpin moment to move that forward and move that momentum forward in this regard. And, the question is that in this community, we don't support entrepreneurialism. And I get it. I'm a Republican, despite Amy Klobuchar flirtation. I'm a Republican. And as a result, I feel that businesses should go out and make that themselves. At the same time, as mayor, I recognize that, a lot of what is going to drive the 21st century economy is going to be entrepreneurs. It's going to be the small shops. And while certainly WCDC and the Chamber, as I talked to Gwen, they have their role. But at the same time, we have to continue to develop new businesses. And that entrepreneurial spirit is something that not only is lacking here in Indianola with, again, some important movers in terms of Emerge and Launchpad and whatnot, but we see it. And one thing that I picked up from the conferences down in Kansas City from Kauffman Foundation, John, is that a lot of towns, and I think that's why they invite mayors to this conference, is that a lot of towns are missing on that. And so it does take a lot of energy to build these relationships. And as a result, I felt as if this was something that I could do as mayor to kind of move this forward. But you're right, John, certainly. And you and I have been in this game long enough that, we have to continue to re-innovate and think about how we're going to move this forward. And I'm not saying this is the golden nugget by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it would be an important first step to begin to build that infrastructure environment and put those entrepreneurs in contact with persons who can help them in this regard. And again, we're all in business, or we all have to make money one way or the other. It would be my hope that some of this would be value added, that some of these benefits would be passed on to entrepreneurs because of these early relationships that are established. It would be my hope that it will build a momentum, and some of that would be gratis, or some of that would be pro bono work. But again, this I view as an important part of that process.
Mayor, this is Heather. I'd just like to make a few comments. I do respect and am excited about the entrepreneurial, like the idea of it, the concept. I do feel that the dollars that we're talking about, the 3,500, seem more like a supplemental to me. They don't seem like something that jumpstarts or kickstarts anything like this. And also want to comment that there are some great partnerships that are listed here. I'm not real well versed on what Emerge is, or what they're doing or what they've done. Not sure about like partnerships as far as internships that are available at Simpson for this, and how many entrepreneurs that have contacted Brenda through the chamber. I haven't heard anything from the chamber aspect of it. So I support the idea. I don't really support the $3,500 because I feel like it's not in line with where it's at right now. I'd love to see it come back at some point where it seems to have a better timeline and well thought out plan.
Well, I think it's well thought out, Heather, with all due respect, but I appreciate your comments. All right, so I'm getting a sense. I'm getting a sense you guys are opposed to it. So at this time, I'll just suspend this conversation.
Mayor, I'd like to add one more thing. I'm not opposed to the concept and the theory. I would like to see a little more definition. When I sat in the Emerge meeting, which was years ago, because I've been gone a while and it was before I left, they had a lot of local entrepreneurs volunteering to sit in and listen to those sessions. And I just recall one was Lee Adams, and he gave terrific advice to the students. And I think there would be, more opportunity for things like that. I'm not trying to tell you how to, plan your committee and your action, but I think that I would hope, like you said, that there would be more pro bono, that because to be honest, like John said, 3,500 won't go very far in paying those professionals by the hour. So.
And Mayor, I'd like to comment right quick. I think I'm more concerned about the sudden process here. We, agreed on a project back in 2019. Here's my 46 years of teaching coming out. And that was in 2019. And suddenly the assignment is due at the very last minute. We're just going to change the assignment or change the deal. Now, I believe a project needs to change to evolve to something that's more meaningful. But this is the first time we've seen any of this, and that disturbs me. And we're at the deadline, so that's a concern. I just think it's important to bring up. So.
Well, it's amazing, you guys, to me, that someone can walk in and ask you guys for $10,000 who's not on the agenda, and you give them $10,000, and here I'm asking for $3,500. It's already been approved. That would help in a long term, and I continue to get red flags. But I get it. That's neither here nor there. So I appreciate your conversations, Bob. I appreciate your insights. We'll move on to consideration of the nomination of Emmett Conrad to the Library Board of Trustees. I believe you see this in your packet. Mr. Conrad has been active in the public library previously.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion. Jackie?
Councilmember Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall,
Aye.
Marchant,
Aye.
Hewlin,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Kling.
Aye.
Moving on to public consideration, new business, a resolution approving a professional service agreement with Confluence for various code updates.
Move to approve.
Oh, second.
Discussion.
Can we do kind of a description, kind of so people at home can kind of understand what we're dealing with here?
Sure. Mayor, members of the council, Charlie DeSalle, Community Economic Development Director. So as part of the comp plan, when we were updating that, and we've been talking about this ever since I've been here, the need to update our zoning code, subdivision code, site planning codes. I could go even deeper. We have a true artistry tree ordinance that's very out of date. So one of the issues identified in the comp plan and identified in the work plan that you received and filed this evening was to do various code updates. So we are just starting that process here. So in the memo that we had prepared for you, I think we had $50,000 budgeted for next fiscal year. The total bill on this was $79,000, so we'll carry some of it over into the next fiscal year. But we'll at least get a few of the code updates started and then completed in the next fiscal year, and then we'll do some other chapters after that.
Along across 2 years.
Yeah, and it'll probably take that with all the code updates that we have to do, but start with the bigger ones first, which is the zoning ordinance, and then kind of move into some of the smaller ones after that.
And we'll be approving those and.
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
it. Okay.
Yeah, I know that was a question. We won't do them all in one just because that would be confusing and very cumbersome to do, but try to do them in steps.
After we're supposedly done, then will they continue to update when we do stuff, or will we do that, or how will that work?
You're talking like as we go to,
Yeah, as we
I mean, it'll
go.
be similar to what we do right now.
Okay,
When we have
that's fine.
something that comes up, you ask us to identify it, we look at it, take it to the planning commission for recommendation.
Thanks.
Question for Charlie. Jackie, go ahead.
Councilmember Marchant,
Aye.
Hewlin,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Kling,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall. Aye.
Item 2 under new business is presentation of COVID-19 financing plan.
All right, give me a second here to. Hello. There we go. Mayor, members of the council, I'm here to do a presentation on what we've been considering for dealing with the current pandemic that we have, COVID-19. As you can see, I marked down, I put an asterisk next to the word planning. Planning is, in this sense, is not considered to be a noun, but more of an active verb use because we're continuing to deal with the pandemic. It's changing all the time, so we're dealing with things that are always changing and always planning to meet new challenges. Oh. Hang on. So I'd like to start out with a quote. So this is a quote from Michael Jordan. If you're confident you have done everything possible to prepare yourself, then there's nothing to fear. Well, we got to, like I said, everything keeps changing. So how do we know if we're confident we've done everything? Well, we're trying to do everything possible to prepare ourselves. So in essence, try not to have anything to fear. Perhaps a better quote would be the often quoted quote from Benjamin Franklin, which is if you're failing to plan, you're planning to fail. So, well, we're trying to do everything possible and trying to see every avenue, every aspect of this pandemic to deal with it. So here's the list of revenues that we feel are going to be mostly impacted in our financial planning. Hotel, you can see the list. I don't need to read it. I'll go through here each slides here. Beginning with Hotel-Motel Tax Fund, the original budget revenue was $150,000, $125,000 of Bravo CVB and the nonprofits, and then $25,000 also to Parks and Rec. In talking with Doug, we decided that we would take not do the transfer of $25,000 to Parks and Rec so that he could budget accordingly. We are assuming that there's going to be a third of a cut to the revenue total, so we adjusting the budget from 150,000 to 100,000. And as you know, we have a 28E agreement with the Des Moines Convention Visitors Bureau and Bravo for 2/7 of that revenue to each. And figuring that out from 100,000, that's 28,571 each, or 57,000 total, which leaves 42,858 for the nonprofits. We're also assuming in doing the planning that we would keep the budgeted amounts to the nonprofits, and that is $49,250. And so to refresh your memory, here is a list of those contributions that were budgeted for nonprofits. Of course, as a council, as I showed on the previous slide, this is a council decision on whether or not you want to remain with these allocations for the nonprofit.
I jump in there and say that my feeling is we made commitments to these organizations, and that we should probably really consider going ahead and funding them the way we put it up there. The word of caution that I might like to throw out to them is these organizations might want to expect nothing or significant less as we go into the following budget year. So in other words, if you're going to come back in December and ask, the pool might not be available, but I'd like to see us honor these.
Yeah, I too would like to see us honor those. I think we're going to do it.
Yeah, and that's the direction we felt was, the council would like to go in, and we've already drafted a letter to the nonprofits to let them know that next year might be a little bit tight. It depends on how this whole thing does shake out. Hopefully, Councilmember Parker noted that more people using the hotel, maybe the revenue will come back up. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. The next revenue stream we'll need to keep in mind is the local option sales and service tax. The proceeds, as you know, is going towards a water resource recovery facility, construction, the debt service dealing with that construction. The state estimated that we would be receiving 1.2 million. We budgeted conservative at $1 million each year for the WRRF and construction. And so we're assuming, based on information that we received from the state, that there will be a 20% loss to the local option sales tax, which puts us right about at that 1 million if the state estimate is correct. So one of the things that we want to keep in mind as more people are shifting more from bricks and mortar to internet, there is something that they did put into effect was the internet sales tax. So that may help as far as the estimate moving forward, that we won't be missing out on that sales tax we're gaining from internet sales. Two key milestones that we want to keep in mind, and that I'll be bringing more information to council in the future. In August, they give us the estimates that we will be receiving from the state. Actually, they're not estimates. They tell us what they're going to be giving us each month through FY21. And then in November, they do a reconciliation payment. So we get two payments in November. Hopefully we get two payments in November. In November, the reconciliation is for the previous year. If they paid too little the previous year, they give us money. If they didn't give us enough, or if they gave us too much, then it's a negative amount. And that doesn't mean the city has to pay that amount. It means that the payments from December on through July will be less than what they originally told us in August. So we're going to have to keep those two milestones in mind as moving forward. So August, as I said, August will be receiving what they're going to be paying us each month, and then in November that we'll see that reconciliation, whether it goes down, and then whether our payments are going to be much less than what we're anticipating, or more, might in fact affect the sewer rates. But as I said, we're budgeting conservatively, so we're hoping that that impact will be minimal. Road use tax fund. Our May 2020 allocation was normal, and it helped meet our FY20 budget target. What we've heard lately is that the impact from the road use tax fund, people driving less, and spending less on gas, that the impact will be felt kind of slowly. It's not all at once. So, but we're assuming a 20% cut, which is about 360,000 for a normal year. As you can see, before I get into that, in the 2020 census boost to the population count, we're expecting an increase, as you know, because we're expecting the population count to be higher by a couple thousand, 1,500 to 2,000 people. About the middle of FY21, we should see that the return from the census count. And so that almost goes into effect immediately from my previous experience back in 2010. So we should see a boost from that. And then as noted in this graph from the State Department of Transportation, traffic volume is increasing. What you're seeing here is from the Iowa DOT website. They have 120 automatic traffic counters around the state, and they automatically give that data to the Department of Transportation. As you can see, there was quite a significant drop off of vehicle traffic volume around April, but as we're moving along here, as business is returning to some state of normalcy, that there is some volume coming back. So hopefully there'll be more spending more on gas, and our road use tax revenue won't be experience such a drop in. And so what we're looking at as far as moving forward to deal with that drop in revenue is that we have budgeted a $250,000 transfer from road use into the capital projects streets fund, and about $250,000 each year. And so we would probably look at FY21 if it is a significant drop of not doing that and pushing some of those projects forward for 1 year. In FY21, we have the one block of Clinton between Howard and Buxton that we needed to finish, and we would just need to move that forward. Property tax revenue, this is our most stable revenue stream. What we've seen so far is that the receipts that we've been receiving from the county have been normal and meeting budget targets. Our most concern would later on be a delay in the receipts. So what we're doing right now is that we're working with the police. As you know, in FY21, we have 2 new police officers. The council approved in the FY21 budget, and also the 1.5 position for the library. We're working with the police department and library is to delay those hirings, kind of a hiring freeze only for those new positions, so that until October, until we see what those initial property tax revenues are going to be like. Park and rec and pool revenue, this is the most likely heaviest to be impacted. As you heard from Doug, this how he's working on meeting his the impacts to his revenue. Most of his expenses are tied to fees, the seasonal mowers, and also the concessions that we're not selling concessions, that we're not purchasing concessions to be sold. So that's how we're dealing with most of those expenses. If it is a much more significant impact than what we're anticipating, then we'll have some delay in the vehicle or CIP projects. We have a Dodge Caravan that's slated for purchase for the recreation department, and then we're also may delay in the CIP project, which would be the next segment of the Jerry Kelly Trail. Other areas of concern in community development, most of the services in the community development are tied to fees such as building permits, and then also we have our code enforcement. That would also be a council decision on whether or not we would be, how you would want us to address code enforcement, actively address code enforcement, or maybe pull back on that a little bit. And then for the public library, most programs are tied to fees. The most concern that we would have is whether or not the county and state would live up to their contributions that they've
forecasted for the city. So we'll have to keep an eye out on the county and state contributions that they make to the library. And then the public safety department, one concern that we have is the utility pilot payments to make sure that how they're receiving their revenue from their utility payments, to make sure those are coming in on time and that they're keeping up with their pilot payments, because that is paying a significant portion of that is paying for the police department. Our ambulance fees may drop. We did have a drop off in March and April, but currently for the fiscal year 20, we have more than exceeded the budgeted target of $700,000 in the revenue for ambulance charges. So we're about 722 right now. So we've met the FY20, and we're seeing as more, there's some return to normalcy. We're seeing more of a pickup in the in ambulance calls. And then our fines and ticket revenue have been down because there's been less driving. So that's a significant less portion of their budget, but we did see the fines and tickets revenue go down. In conclusion, we have most of our impacts are manageable. Our key targets are one-time capital expenses. So we're mainly looking at capital expenses as far as dealing with those revenue drops. So they are manageable. We're already seeing some return to normalcy. As I said, some businesses are reopening, and so we're seeing more traffic volume having been picked up. And the second half of the year, we don't know what's going to happen. Is there going to be a spike, or is there going to be a return, a wave of the pandemic? We don't know, but we'll have to just make sure that we're planning to meet that unknown. At the end here, I just wanted to conclude that we were following some key budget principles, and those principles are important to remember as far as budgeting to meet unexpected emergencies. And those are reserve policies, so that we have those reserve policies. It's important to have those reserve policies so that when we have these unexpected emergencies, that we can meet those challenges. We're conservative budgeting, as with the local officer sales tax, that we did very conservative budgeting so that if we have a significant drop in those elastic revenues streams, that we can meet those challenges. And then tying programs to fees, we're looking at tying more of the programs to fees so that if there is a drop off in fees, then we just don't run those programs as much. Any questions? Andy, I just wanted to circle back on the 49,000 whatever odd dollars, and make sure that we've got a consensus on council that that's what we wanted to do with the money, is continue to spend what we committed.
I think that's the fairest approach.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure. I think there's only maybe a couple of us said anything. I just want to circle back and make sure either we're on board with it or we need to change the thinking.
No, I agree with you too. I do think we need to make it abundantly clear that next year may be a whole different story. So I think it's too late now to pull back, but I think we should honor those commitments. But after that, I think it may take a year to be able to make up for what's lost this year. So.
Okay.
But if they know now, they
Right.
can save that money if
Right.
they haven't had the operation expenses.
Exactly.
So, right. They can plan. That's right.
Okay. Thanks, Andy.
And then I do have a question for Doug Byland. I know he's on here, but you'd mentioned concessions, and I guess I know that one of the things that was talked about in Doug's report to us on what they're doing coming open was out at Pickard that there would be less concessions there. I didn't know. I've had a number of people actually ask me about that not understanding why concessions aren't open. I know, and it's not the only facility doing that. There are others, but the comment is, well, restaurants are open, why can't, so I guess I didn't know if Doug was available to answer that question as to the thoughts, or others are looking at it, or what you're looking at as far as when maybe, be able to pick up some revenue that way.
Yeah, John, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been looking at a lot of the guidance and advice from Iowa Department of Education when they're starting to do baseball, softball games and things there. The other thing we're trying to do with concessions or are limiting or not having it is that will attract a big group of people in one area, and we got to be worried about what that big line is going to be. So when we do start doing concessions, which we're hoping to do here shortly, is we'll limit what we do. So it might only be bottled water, Powerade, and candy bars and chips, and we won't make hot dogs and won't make walking tacos and all those kind of things where people are waiting. So we're looking at all that guidance to make sure we can keep that social distancing, but also maximize a little bit of the revenue that we can get out of the park too. So.
Okay, all right, thanks, Doug.
Yep.
Looks good, Andy.
Yep, it's great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Mr. Waller, City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I think that is the loudest I've ever heard Doug Byland talk.
I agree.
Now I feel like we could jump in because the phone's like 1 inch from my face. That's probably why.
Thanks, Doug. Just the 2 items on the report, discussion direction regarding parking around the square. As many of you know, over the last couple of weeks, our police department has fielded some phone calls regarding parking and started to actively enforce the parking restrictions on the square. As part of that, we received a number of calls from business owners, many of whom, like a hair salon, have their clients that when you have a hair appointment, my hair appointment is probably about 10 minutes, but for others, it's a little bit longer, and it can extend beyond the 3 hours. And so we've had a number of situations where business owners or clients of businesses have received tickets. Now our police department, Chief Button, have been very customer service oriented on that and have given courtesies. But what this has done is this started the conversation about whether or not the council would be willing to entertain a moratorium on the parking enforcement. And then what we would do is we would work with the chamber and the business owners around the square and include the county and the contractors to come up, much like we did with the A-frame signs and the regulations on the A-frame, come back with something that is much more amenable, much more economic development friendly, much more business friendly, and something that's done in a collaborative manner. And the hope is, as we look to the courthouse project, we know in talking with our partners over at the county that there's going to be many more contractors that are going to start working on that site, and then obviously streetscape. So there will be a series of projects that will be coming. And then once the courthouse gets open, now we're going to be looking at different parking regulations. So having those conversations now, working with the partners to identify and come up with and have those conversations now, so down the road when we have to have these again, it's not something that's new. So staff is requesting, and we did talk to the chamber. They were supportive of this effort, and if it's opportunity to talk, and even if it comes back, it's just a moratorium, so it wouldn't change unless there's a proposal that the business owners and chamber would like to present to council.
I think it's a great idea.
I think that's the best.
I do too, but I'm a little jealous. You get 10 minutes in your hair.
I get hours.
No, I think it's a great idea because, my concern is what, this 3-hour thing is great. And I appreciate the mayor's comment last time of, come down and see us, spend 3 hours, and that's it. But I just soon, I think, to me, we really need to work this out because, as we gain more retail and entertainment on the square, which is what we want, in my opinion, that's what that's all about is, I think we need to work this out so that while there is turn, because I get that too, you don't want somebody just leaving the car there all the time. I do think that we need to be cognizant there are those that like to touch everything in a store and spend hours and go to 5-6 stores and sit down and have lunch or get their hair done, whatever. I think that we need to be cognizant of that if that's what the businesses on the square are telling us. So I think that's a great idea to have the conversation. And I mean, we have a perfect storm right now with all the construction, and I get that. And I think as long as we can work with those people that are in charge of that construction to make sure that those guys are, you know, gals are walking a couple extra blocks and parking off of the square, you know. Although when that happens and there's not a lot going on, it really looks like the square's dead. So that's a little nerve wracking too. In the middle of the day when you drive by and there's 3 cars in the whole square. So we've been successful in getting them off, but I want to be cognizant of that as well. So good idea.
Yeah, that's great.
I'd also like to point out, we don't have the luxury of having officers who could just enforce parking. Like, this is a waste of their time. We have
It is.
limited officers with limited resources. Let's put a moratorium.
There are more important.
Yeah.
If there's a consensus to move forward, the way this would work is we'd talk to legal, put together a resolution that we would present, hopefully next meeting, maybe the meeting after that, resolution establishing a moratorium. That way police knows they don't legally have to enforce, and then we'll start those conversations. And as part of that moratorium in conversations with legal, the question was asked, can we, because right now we don't have any sort of legal authority to require contractors to park somewhere else. So as part of that moratorium, it was believed by our legal counsel that we can establish something that would give us a little bit more leverage to then require them to park off-site. So to free up the spots, keep those for the businesses, the visitors to the businesses. So.
Yeah, I don't know who you've gotten hold of, Ryan, or who's talked to council. The folks who call me typically are on the east side of the square, and so that seems, since the workers' entrance is on that side, that seems to be the side that is the most problematic. You've got a couple active businesses there. Pete's isn't as impacted because of the fact that the workers are gone by that time. But I noticed today that there are strikes going on up the square, and hard telling how long those will go. So I would encourage, the moratorium is fine, but I would encourage to find a long-term solution, particularly for the laborers as that number continues to escalate.
Okay, so that's what we'll work towards. Appreciate that. Then before we get to the receive and file, just a note for the viewing audience at home. Amy, Duncan, and I have this conversation all the time. We're going to enter into executive session for personnel. We are not, when we come back out, there is no action to be taken after that. So it would just be an adjourn. So given the technical logistics that have to go through with back there and get it reprogrammed and slotted, we're going to adjourn. So just that's for transparency in the viewing audience at home, and Amy, who I know is in the Zoom chat room. So there's that, and then just receive and file the correspondence that's there.
One more thing, in an effort to be transparent, can you go back to the small business recovery grants, which I thought were great? And can you just remind the public where the money came from?
Oh yeah, sure. So that was earlier in your agenda. That was item E under consent. That was done through a partnership with the city, the city, the Greater Des Moines Partnership, and then True Bank and People's Bank were kind enough to provide the private investment. If you recall early on, the city's contribution was going to be about $2.30 per capita, if I have that number correct. Then the private sector match was going to be 50 cents per capita, and then the partnership was going to match at 50 cents per capita. The partnership actually was very successful in their fundraising activities and is actually contributing $1.48 per capita. So very grateful for that partnership and their efforts to increase that. So it is a true partnership. So about 30,000 is coming from the city, with the remaining of the 66,000 coming from private investment and our partners at the Greater Des Moines Partnership.
I just wanted that to be out with people being able to see the list of the recipients.
Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I move to receive and file the correspondence from May 29 to June 5.
Second.
Jackie?
Go ahead, Jack.
Councilmember Marchant,
Aye.
Hewlin,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Kling,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall.
Aye.
Thanks, Jackie. Item B under other business, enter in closed session in accordance with Iowa Code Section 21.51I to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose appointment, hiring, performance, or discharge is being considered when necessary to prevent needless and irreparable injury to that individual's reputation, and that individual requests closed session.
I
Motion
move-
to go into closed session.
Second.
Thank you. Jackie?
Councilmember Hewlin,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Kling,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Southall,
Aye.
Marchant.
Aye.